Tonight's special guest is David Aston. David is fresh from starring in the brand new New Zealand movie 3 Mile Limit. It's the story of Radio Hauraki. David plays the Minister of Broadcasting who was right in the firing line when the controversy of private radio first surfaced in New Zealand. We welcome David Aston as our special guest on The Beat Goes On. David Aston, welcome to The Beat Goes On.
Pleasure.
Now, David, you're here on The Beat Goes On, a baby boomer chat show, because last week, on Thursday evening, a movie was released, a red carpet premiere for 3 Mile Limit, the story of Radio Hauraki.
That's right.
If anything is baby boomer material, it's the story of Radio Hauraki.
That's right. And it's great that story is being told. The script is interesting because in the film, of course, there is no David Gapes. So there's
it's a character, very much like David Gapes.
Very much like David Gapes.
Well, it is David Gapes in a way, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah. Clearly it is. And it's the Radio Hauraki story.
Now, 2,500 people attended the premiere.
Yeah, apparently.
Could you feel a ripple of excitement go? Then the clapping and the cheering. I mean, that audience identified with the story, didn't they? They loved it. I mean, I loved it too.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, as I said, it's a story that's been waiting there for some time. It's funny, isn't it? Because, look, I don't listen to a lot of commercial radio myself, but Radio Hauraki is, dare I say, the kind of mainstream, I suppose, aren't they? Yeah. So to think back to the day when they were these radical, I wouldn't even call them pirates, but just radical young men and women who wanted
called them revolutionaries, didn't they?
Well,
in the movie.
We're talking in the mid-60s, and that's, this is the time of Che Guevara, of riots in Paris, of
68, that was the year.
That's 68, the Vietnam War. Well, probably from 65 onwards, that whole change.
The times were a-changing.
The times were a-changing, and it's mentioned in the movie. It's a very nice little script addition. There's a little scene where I'm in at a dinner party and somebody mentions Bob Dylan, The Times Are a-Changing, and that is a very nice storyline because for me, what comes through really strongly, and the reality of it is the word freedom, Yeah. The freedom of expression, and it has a double-edged thing, but that is the core of it, isn't it?
But we need to tell our audience that you played the part of the Minister of Broadcasting. Hisses and boos about the Minister of Broadcasting, because back in those days, David, you can remember too, radio was a stifling environment, wasn't it? It played chamber music, and and the government and the people who ran the NZBC or whatever it was called, they thought that they were catering for all. But they weren't, were they? And that is the cause of the rise of Hauraki. And you played the Minister of Broadcasting. Can I, first of all, before we go any further, what a marvellous job you did.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, great.
And so what were your expectations when you got this role? You obviously did some research. What was a Minister of Broadcasting like in 1965?
This story or this incident or this prompting came about on his watch. So he didn't invite it, he wasn't looking for it, and it arrives on his desk. The buck stops here. I think the thing that, I guess one of the things that impresses me, if you like, about him, or that I'm conscious of, is, I suppose, is his dignity. I find him a dignified, honourable man of the time, who he's not a villain. He's not doing anything out of the ordinary, and in fact, it would be against the law. That's the first thing. Yeah, they would have to make a law change.
Everything was against the law.
No, well, it would be illegal, and of course they say, well, why not just give us a license on land? But they can't, because there's no law provision for that to happen.
The NZBC was supposed to be catering for all people, and there must have been something wrong with those people if they weren't catered for.
I guess, look, I can remember, as I said before, growing up, I was a little bit younger, but people had records. That's the first thing. You could buy a 45 or an album, you could buy a Beatles album, whoever it is, whoever that you considered embodied your kind of rock and roll heroes.
So you could hear it, but
the music's out there. There were there were record shops you can go and listen to the music. So the music was out there. It wasn't.
You couldn't hear it on the radio.
But you couldn't hear it on the radio, and that is an extraordinary thing. And we didn't live and still don't live in a Stalinist regime. It is a democracy. So there's no way they can suppress that. But it's interesting, isn't it? They just didn't go the extra thing. Hold on, all these people are listening to the music. Are they being corrupted? Are they? Is it doing something terrible to our youth? Probably not. So I guess it just is that conservatism, isn't it, of the period, that they weren't, until there comes this feeling of inevitable momentum about it, which they can't stop. There's a kind of a wave, isn't there, of popular opinion.
A tidal wave of baby boomers.
Tidal wave of baby boomers, yeah.
David, we'll get back to it later on, but first of all, it's called 3 Mile Limit.
Yep.
It's going to be released in the next few weeks. Please, New Zealand, go and see this great movie. It's fabulous. And you'll see David in the movie. He's the Minister of Broadcasting.
Yeah.
Does a fabulous job. I salute you, David.
Thank you very much.
Now we want to know about David Aston. How did it all begin? Where did it begin? And why did it begin?
I suppose in a nutshell, I suppose in terms of my genes, if you like, my father, he's been dead about 5 years now, Doug Aston. Some people of the older generation will remember him. He was associated probably notably with Marcus Craig and Billy T. James.
So it was showbiz career.
Showbiz. He had a job, and he was doing this in his spare time. And interestingly, I think in his latter life became a full-time professional when he'd kind of looked after the family. But I would definitely say that the theatrical, dramatic genes come from him and his father, who I never knew, but was a guy called Edward Aston, who was a contemporary of Charles Atlas.
Wow. You were born 1953?
53.
That's in Auckland, New Zealand, or in New Zealand?
No, I was born in London.
London? You're a
Came
Londoner?
out, yeah, I'm a Londoner.
You came here when?
Came here about 64. The parents emigrated to New Zealand. There were these cheap fares. It was a wonderful journey of about 6 weeks. I don't know if you've ever done it through the Suez Canal. Very exciting when you're a young kid on a boat.
Oh, wonderful, wasn't it? What an adventure.
Yeah, and I think it's the prospect of a new life, for a young family. So that took them to New Zealand. And then I grew up. Got educated at Pakuranga College in Auckland. I went to university, Auckland University, drama school. Various other things have happened, but
a natural inclination towards drama. You just fell into it.
Yeah, I've always had the impulse to do it. Of course, whether you actually want to make a career out of it, that's another thing. Again, you can become a drama school teacher, or you can become a closet actor or something. But you have your ups and downs, of course, and it isn't a regular, fulfilling job.
Got to get a real job sooner or later.
Get a real job.
You've been in The Matrix, haven't you?
I mean, The Matrix, essentially, it's right at the top of the movie. So it's interesting where they have a turning point 5 minutes into the movie, and the character's placed there to put a bit of pressure on the essential character, and off he goes on a fantastic journey.
But New Zealand actors now, they're making inroads into the Hollywood movies, aren't they? Which is great. In fact, that was a huge movie, wasn't it? The Matrix. And
it was. You don't know what it's going to be like, of course, when you're in it. And interesting. I'll always remember the doing the audition for the. I'll call them the Wachowski brothers, Joel, and I've forgotten the other guy's name. But it's really interesting, quite disarming how unlike they are in terms of your image of a Hollywood director. The opposite. They're kind of like dudes. Like a lot of things, it's all driven by talent and creativity, and when you get right down to it, it's all down to somebody who has the ability to tell or create a world in which great stories can be told, and that won't be an accountant, probably, will it? So but what I mean, it's people who have creative impulses. As I said, going back to the movie, I really hope this movie is a great success.
What was the first you heard about the movie? You were approached by the director, or you saw an advertisement for auditions?
No,
how did it all happen?
Well, I got a message via my agent, that Craig was interested in looking at me, and then from my memory we went to an office somewhere on the North Shore, somewhere, but we teamed up, and there was Matt Wheeland and several of the actors I think were already committed to it, and we just basically improvised a couple of scenes. He may have even put some down on tape, but you know, I guess it was touch and go for him whether he was even going to go ahead, and there are deferred payments, and the people have made sacrifices, if you like, to make the film happen. Because if it was Hollywood, of course, you'd need a lot more money.
Yes. Well, good on him, good on him. He's told a wonderful story about our New Zealand, our youth, our baby boomer history.
Yeah.
And last week, on Thursday night, when I heard those 2,500 people laugh in the right places, you know, clapping, I mean, they were carried along by a wonderful story, weren't they?
They were. I keep thinking to myself, boy, he told that story really well.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we look at so many movies, and sometimes there's holes where the story falls in, or one character doesn't work, or the conflict doesn't work. But just the way he's constructed the story and edited it, and the editor has done a terrific job, and the music, it just flows, and by the end, you know, it's like always a good test. You think, gosh, 90 minutes.
Where did it go? Yeah.
That's right, and I think it'll be a great thing for Kiwis to see. And even those who weren't there, of course, they'll get this little glimpse of what it was like to live in that moment. Terrific.
Well, I am just amazed at how you just captured the Minister of Broadcasting perfectly. You know, as you said, he was just a man caught in a set of circumstances. He wanted to do the best for the kids of New Zealand, and in the end he did, didn't he? The Prime Minister and the two of them.
Well, it's interesting. I discovered subsequently, I think, may have got this slightly wrong, but I think there was something like a 20th anniversary of Radio Hauraki. That would make it something like 1985 or something like that. And that particular minister, I think, had gone to South Africa to live. And he was invited back because there was no real animosity between he and these young bucks, you know, that created Radio Hauraki. And as I understand it, I was just talking to Ian McGann on opening night, and he actually went to the chap's funeral because he died about 15 years ago. So that I found that interesting. He was actually on their side. That was the first thing. He was actually on their side, but I think the reality was he was constrained by a piece of legislation and the kind of climate that was running New Zealand. And I guess, you know, it's hard for these little doors to get pushed over.
Now, we both lived through it, but what amazed me was the number of young people at the premiere.
Yeah.
Thousands of young people. Then I thought, wow, it's a whole new audience, isn't it? And they're hearing the story.
Yeah.
They never grew up with the story. They never lived through it, but they're seeing it, and the story has been told, which is wonderful.
It is good, and it's funny, isn't it? Because you see the people that were in it now. Of course, they're those elderly baby boomers, aren't they? But the ones that were in it, the age, they're the ones watching it.
Yeah.
That's the reality, isn't it? A lot of them, young people, you know, 20, 25. And I think, I really hope rather, they'll relate to the kind of energy and idealism that it takes to do something like that, because, you know, you have to put yourself on the line, and I think the movie does that very well indeed.
Thank you, David.